Now it's time to set the goals for the next cycle of inflation. This way, you're always moving forward, growing, making money, not losing it. Imagine, have more freedom and more fun. Start a gold IRA with Noble Gold now and fight inflation. And this month, for every IRA above 20K, you'll get an incredible 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin completely free as a thank you. You can't go wrong with Noble Gold. Call 877-646-5347 now to find out more or visit noblegoldinvestments.com. Again, that's noblegoldinvestments.com. Hey, and welcome. It's Jean Nolan here. I'm excited that you're here. We just sat down with Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, who really rose to fame during the last 2 years as the one who developed the Zelenko Protocol, and we sat down to talk about his rise to fame, what he has to say about COVID-19, what he has to say about treatments, what he has to say about the experimental gene therapy, but we also got philosophical and spiritual, as you can imagine. And Dr. Zelenko really shared a lot of personal, intimate details about his story and his outlook. Now, in days where the government announces that there's going to be a disinformation governance board, which is the, same as the Ministry of Truth that we know from George Orwell's 1984, it is no wonder that what we can show here is a selection of small snippets of this conversation with Dr. Zelenko, and we invite you to come over to Locals, our new inspired community that we're building there, which is censor-free, which is unfiltered. Create an account if you haven't yet, which is free of charge, and watch the full, uncensored, unfiltered interview with Dr. Vladimir Zelenko. So I'll see you over there.
I was a country family physician, kind of, I liked the older model of a family doctor, having a personal relationship with his patients. And someone once gave me a compliment that I'm a family member to 4,000 families. So that's very meaningful to me. And I was working in upstate New York in a community that has 35,000 people that live within a square mile of each other. And when COVID arrived in the first week, March 2020, it spread through the community. And I found myself in the epicenter of the largest outpatient outbreak of COVID in America. And at that time, there was no treatment. The only thing we were telling patients is take Tylenol and go home. And when your breathing gets worse, go to the hospital, end up on a respirator. And 85% of the people on respirators were dying. So that was the treatment paradigm. And so I had people looking to me for help, and I really had nothing to offer them, like anyone else in the world. So I literally was praying to God for help. And I got a video sent in my email, MedCram, episode 34 on YouTube, Dr. Schultz. And that video changed the world. Not that I'm against research or clinical trials, but they have one inherent flaw, which is it takes a long time. And when you're dealing with a battlefield World War III situation, and I'm a frontline soldier, I didn't have a year for research. So I decided that I'm going to improvise, adapt, and overcome, like the Marines say. And I started using just common sense approaches. And so before I tell you the actual drugs I used, there were two things that I needed to resolve. Number one was I didn't know who this virus is going to target. And to solve that problem, I came up with a clever idea. I called local hospitals and I spoke to their intensive care unit doctors. And I asked them a simple question: which patients are dying from COVID? And they told me, well, the older patients and those with medical problems. Just to give you a sense of what I was dealing with, my little office used to see 50 patients a day, and now we had 250, at least. Half my staff was sick. Ancillary services like radiology and phlebotomy or blood drawers were closed. Hospitals were at near capacity. So it was a mass casualty event. It was the beginning of my understanding, or realization, I would say. People call it red pilling, but of understanding that there was something very evil and corrupt behind what we were seeing. I want to request of the listeners not to believe a word that I'm saying. You should trust but verify. Everything that I'm saying, I could justify and document and bring references for. I challenge you to do your due diligence and come to your own conclusions. I'm only one person. With that said, clinically, in treating patients, it didn't matter to me what it was. I view things like, okay, living is good, dying is bad. My patients are having a flu-like illness and then they die. And that's new. I've been a doctor for 20 years. I have never seen that before. So I had a new clinical syndrome, and that was killing my patients. So you can't tell me my patients were not dying. I saw my patients dying. Okay? That was true. And then I did something with God's help, and they stopped dying. And that was good. I don't care. I was very goal-oriented, Now, 2 years into this, I know exactly what this is. We know who created it. We know who paid for it. So what we're really dealing with is dysregulation of the human immune system. Or people have acquired, because they didn't have it before, right? They acquired an immunodeficiency syndrome. In the 1920s, and this is a matter of record, Rockefeller, who was the owner of Standard Oil at that time, got an army of propagandists, hired them, and they went to every medical school in the country, bribed the administration to alter the thought patterns of future physicians and teach them kind of reliance on pharmaceutical products that, by the way, interestingly enough, at that time were petroleum-based, which was what Standard Oil was. And so there was a lot of suppression of natural or healing methods that evolved or developed over millennia, actually. Those were marginalized and suppressed, and there was this kind of codependence on the pharmaceutical industry that was built. That started in the 1920s, and it hasn't changed since then. In theory, I know the nature of humanity. Someone will kill someone for $10. So once we start talking about multi-billion-dollar industries, it's not too far-fetched to believe that these types of organizations are capable of using tactics to suppress their business threats or geopolitical plans. I was aware of the theological dynamics of, let's call it good versus evil, or consciousness, free choice, and to have free choice, you need to have options. What I've come to realize at this point is that there's nothing new here. What we're dealing with is primordial or biblical forces at play, but just enclosed in a different battlefield. But the battle itself is the same. And it's basically the tension between God consciousness versus enslavement. And because in my understanding, there's only one type of truly free person, and that is one who chooses to be a servant of God. Because by doing so, you take the yoke of your own insecurities and other people's opinions off of you, and you rely on your Creator, who makes you anew every instant of time out of love, and you rely on Him for the fortitude and the strength to deal with the fear and the unknown of life. And so what is called the New World Order, that all of our leadership is talking about, is really a rebranding of the oldest world order of idolatry, paganism, and child sacrifice. For sure, there's going to be, at the end of this process, a cleaner, better world where the true narrative, which is the knowledge of God, the knowledge of God will permeate the world, fill the world like the waters cover the seas, as the prophet says. And so that will happen. The key is that over time, you should progress in your consciousness development. In other words, you should be living life on a higher plane now than you were 10 years ago. And in 10 years, hopefully, you'll be perceiving reality in a much deeper way than you are now. And that's the process of maturation. FDA allows me only to say that it's essentially food or a nutritional supplement and an immune booster. I'm allowed to say that. I'm not allowed to make any statements, but what I could say, like for example in Z-Stack, I could say that according to peer-reviewed literature on the NIH server, quercetin and vitamin C is a effective zinc ionophore or zinc delivery system. I could also say that according to peer-reviewed literature on the NIH server, zinc inhibits RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, which inhibits viral replication. And I could also say that according to peer-reviewed literature on the NIH server, vitamin D, or D3, has shown drastic reductions in intensive care unit admissions. In other words, people that have high normal levels of vitamin D don't get that sick. Their immune response is more brisk. They're more prepared to deal with stressors like infections. And so Z-Stack, with experience, is really more appropriate for younger people or lower risk people, for symptom control. You see, initially, I defined success as don't die. Don't end up in the hospital in a respirator. I didn't even care if you suffered for 2 weeks. It was overwhelming. I was just happy you weren't dead. But now we got really good at treating it, so quality of life is important. And if I could take someone who's suffering and would suffer for 2 weeks and reduce it to a few days, that has value. It's relieving human suffering. So that's where Z-Stack is more appropriate. So first I have to tell you that I open sourced all that information. So anyone who wants to be my competitor, you can go and manufacture it yourself, I don't care. You can put the ingredients together yourself. People are telling me that the prices are comparable and the trust factors, they know that they feel more comfortable. I was used by God to make this stuff. And so people feel more comfortable going to the source, I guess. So with that said, if you want my product or the convenience of having it all in one with an assurance of quality, you can go to my website called zstacklife.com. That's where you buy the product, but there's even a more important website that's not about business or not about selling stuff, it's about education, and that's my personal website, Vladimir Zelenko, MD.com. And there you'll find all the educational material, both for the layman and for the professional, where it's all free. You can just educate yourself. In reality, just think of it philosophically. You begin to die from the day you're born. No one lives forever. Some people live 20 years, some people live 100 years, but in the grand scheme of creation, it's finite. So in my opinion, it's not important when and how you die. It's much more important how you live.